Welcome back to the main frame portion of my build video series for the Blade 700X. And to start this portion off, we are going to be putting together the frame set, and this is page 8 of the manual, where it shows you bolt all these pieces together on the frame and you put everything together as to start it out. But before you do that, I would recommend that you get some sandpaper and sand the edges of the carbon fiber smooth. When you do so, please make sure you wear breathing protection, as carbon fiber dust kind of starts going airborne once you start sanding this frame. So be careful of that. Don't want you inhaling that stuff. If you don't have breathing protection, I would say sand it under a slow running faucet, or sand it wet. That keeps everything from flying and basically going airborne. So after you sand your frames, the next step is bolting on these pieces onto the frame. And per the manual, the top bearing block bolts on there, and it is oriented like this, like so. I got my frames pointing to the left. So in that case, this is the front. This is the front of the helicopter. This side points to the top, is facing the top, which is the rotor blades. This side faces the main gear. Okay, so this would be bolting onto the helicopter, to the frame, like so. Then the second piece, same orientation. This way to the left is the front. This is the side that faces up to the top of the helicopter, and this is the bottom that faces down the main gear. Don't be alarmed. This is how it comes from the factory. There is no bearing there by design. So, like I said, it's like this, and it would go onto the frame like this. For the bottom piece, this side points up to the top of the helicopter, and then this side faces down to the skids. Okay, so this would bolt onto this part of the frame, and so on. To wrap it up on this page for the manual, you install these bottom supports, and you close up the frame. So, however, there is another way of doing this, and I've learned, like I said, I have another Blade 700X that I've been flying for quite some time, and built and maintained. So what I'll do is take this off, and I will show you another way, which I think is a better way, as it makes electronics or setup easier down the road. So what I did here was bolt all the servos together on the top bearing block and that middle block. But before that, what I did also was I plugged in the servos to the AR7200. And for those guys with their kit version, you can plug it into your fly barless controller of choice. And I already set the servo arms 90. So what that does is, as you can see, once everything's bolted, it's difficult to access the center without taking off the whole servo. But not really a big deal, since the wires on the servos are removable. So you basically unplug it and take it out and set it up, so on and so forth. So there's always ways around it. I just learned that this is a pretty cool way of putting together the servos. Just makes it easier. You basically end up bolting everything together to the frame like so, and just makes it easier down the road when you put everything together. So just a little bit of detail here. So there's no rubber grommets on the servos. It's directly bolted in with the plastic spacer on each and every one of them. Okay, right now they're set loose, and everything is set loose on the mainframe, and I'll bolt this together. And the reason for that is I'll show it to you. I like tightening down all the bolts on the mainframe while it's on a nice flat surface with the main shaft inserted. That kind of assures that everything is nice and straight when you crank down all the screws on the mainframe. So moving along, I got the frames all closed up here, and the notable things I should mention, which is kind of hard to see on the the paper manual, is there are washers on the middle block, right there and right there, and that is because that's the adjustable block. Depending on whatever servos you use, this is where Blade puts in the part where you can kind of give it an adjustment. If your servos tend to, is a little longer, a little shorter, this block is the one that's adjustable. So there's a washer on that. Otherwise, everything else doesn't have a washer. The bolts right there and on the bottom. So like I mentioned earlier, everything is still loose. And the reason for that, and I haven't attached the skids per the manual. So what I like to do, and it's my habit, is while all the bolts are loose and the frames are together like this, I like to insert the main shaft onto the frames like so. And with this, I wouldn't be doing it here because the surface that I'm on is not really flat. I would go to my glass table outside, and I would set it down right there, and that's where I would start tightening down on every single screw on the helicopter. So what that assures is, for me, is everything is lined up perfectly straight and parallel. The bottom of the frames are on a really nice flat surface. The main shaft keeps everything lined up, and you will see after you tighten everything up and put Loctite on every screw, you will notice that sliding the main shaft in and out when everything's tight is gonna be nice and smooth. I mean, right now you pull up, it's literally, you can feel it grabbing, right? And that's because things are not lined up, things are loose. So that's just one of the tips, and I will go ahead and do that right now, and I will return. So we're now on page 9 of the manual, where it shows putting together the main gear with the auto rotation gear. And for that, I've put everything together already here, just because it's really straightforward, and you will see it in the manual. This hub just goes here on top. 6 button head screws go underneath to secure this to the main gear, and this piece just slides in onto this sleeve right here. So it's really easy. I did have to put this down on the floor to get some leverage while I slid this thing in. It does have a tight fit on there. But when it's done, you get it rotating one way and then locking up on the other way. And the only tip that I would say here is when you're tightening down on the 6 button head screws from underneath, I do it in an alternating pattern. Here, 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 just so I'm assured that the hub goes in nice and tight and even. All right. So that's the only thing I would say about this. And as far as putting it into the helicopter, so on that bag labeled F4, it also comes with the collar. And with that collar, you'll be using the 2 flat head bolts right here, or screws. And then it also comes with 2 shims, which I'll explain where it goes later. So The way this goes onto the heli right now, and we do have the servos in there, so I showed you earlier, the alternate way of building the heli is this main shaft goes in the top bearing block. The collar goes in there, which I'll show, well, which I'll do later. But the collar goes in there and rests on top of the bottom of the top bearing block. And this basically just goes right here. You know, main shaft just goes through, and you secure the whole the Jesus bolt right there. All right, so fairly straightforward. I pull this out. You will see the two holes right here on the top of the main shaft, which is for the collar right here. And this main shaft hole is tapped with threads, so this just bolts in to both sides. And then this one is not tapped. That's where the Jesus bolt just, you know, basically just goes through. Okay. And so if you needed shims, you need to apply shims. Let's say you put everything together, and once everything's bolted down, you have a little bit of up and down play. The shims would go in between the collar and the top bearing block. Okay, so they did provide 2 shims in the package if you do need it. So that would be just the way you would insert it is, pardon here, let's take this out, is once you insert it, you put the shim first, the collar, go all the way through, then put the main gear in. Okay, so I've installed the main gear, main shaft. Everything's fastened properly. Just wanted to show how it is when it's done. So you see the collar right there, and Jesus bolt right there. So after I put everything together, put the Jesus bolt in, I slid the collar up and bolted the 2 screws right there, and make sure there's Loctite when you do it. I did not require any shim, which if I did would be going in between the collar right here and the top block, but don't need the shim at all. Absolutely perfect with regards to how it sits on the frame, nice and smooth. So that finishes that portion of the build. So I'll just put this aside, and the next part is the motor and the motor mount. So for this, also very straightforward. You just pretty much copy what it says on the manual. The only tips I would give is when you put this together, like so, the pinion goes next, and goes in like this, and then the support. Alright, so let me just put these long bolts in, which, by the way, when you put everything together, make sure you got ample Loctite on them so they don't loosen up over time. So I'll do this bolts later, but what I wanted to show is once everything is installed, the pinion, you want that to be pushed all the way up against the support when you put the set screw. Alright, so there, the flat spot is perfectly set already on the motor, so you find the flat spot, as you can see through the hole, push that pinion up all the way down, all the way up, and then go ahead and put in, you know, these small set screws. So make sure that you clean the set screws with alcohol and put Loctite when you put them on. Alright, just another one of those bolts that are that tend to want to vibrate off after quite some time on a helicopter. So make sure you clean it, put everything together, and you know, this is how it should look, and it just bolts into the frame through these side bolts right here, and you bolt it into the frame with these screws and washers, and that's about it for this part. So I'll go ahead and put everything together, Loctite, clean and Loctite, and we will continue. So moving along, on the manual, the next step is to install all the servos and swash links. Since we did the servo in the earlier part of the frame build, what's next is basically just, you know, making the links and installing them. So what I would like to point out is in the manual it shows that you make the links, and the length is between the center of the ball link to the other center. It says on the manual to make it 73 millimeters. Well, what I've found is that's a little too short, and it needed to be lengthened on the other 700X that I built. So as a starting point, I measured my other 700X, and from top, using a caliper, from the top right here to the other top right here, like this, measuring using a caliper, I started off with 85 millimeters. Okay, and it's going to be really close, because as you see here, if I put all the servo arms 90, like so, you'll see that even the mixing arms are pretty much right there, perfect. Okay, so I started with 85, and I will adjust it later once I dial in the AR7200. So one tip I have is, since we installed the servos beforehand, is before you install the motor, is go ahead and install the link here for the elevator. Reason is, it just helps you, just makes it easier getting the screw and the nut for the servo arms when you install this. Okay, so just a quick tip. You can do it with the motor inside, but just makes it easier. All right. So moving along on the frame area, I installed the swash guide right here. Straightforward, just bolts right here. Canopy mounts, also pretty straightforward, just the bolts. And the tail servo, also pretty much the same as the servos on the cyclic. There's a spacer right here, and then the screws lock into this thicker plastic piece. Okay, so for the manual, on the manual, basically what it says now is you start building the rear tail box portion to be part of this top frame set, to be part of this frame set. For me, I like building tail sections separately, so I will cover that on the next segment, which is the tail portion. So what I want to go on now is basically complete the frame itself, and that means building the ESC mount that goes in the front, and building the battery tray, which I also have a tip and a couple of, if setting CG, you can adjust your battery tray mounting locations, and I'll show you that. So what I'll do is I'll continue that, so we'll finish this frame, and once all complete, then I'll go over and start the tail section separately. So now we're on to the remaining pieces to complete the frame portion of the build, and right here is the ESC mount, ESC tray. Simple, no point in really going into this, so I just put it together, and I'll put it aside for now because I will be mounting my AR7200 on the front frame, front mount, so that will go in later in a build. So what I want to show now is how you put together the battery tray, and for here I'm building it exactly as how the manual shows, with the front clamping mechanism. So first off, you bolt these two pieces onto the tray through here, and it's on it's on this side where there's a bigger gap. This is how the manual shows. And on the back part, which is the holes that are smaller, closer to the end, that's where these pieces go. Okay, so this is how the manual shows the battery tray. So I clamped down one side, but I just wanted to show you quickly. So this side, this little spacer goes in this bolt, which goes right through here. And let me just get this all installed. Okay. Okay, so the way it works, as you see, is like that, right? So there's a spring that will go from here to here. The holes are, there you go. So it goes there and goes on here. It comes with a small screw, which, by the way, don't be alarmed. I've been using this small screw for, just as designed. So, with the spring, without any washers. I know people on the forum have posted that they put washers on these screws because they were afraid that the spring might pop off. But I'll be honest, I've been using this setup as it is. You can see there's the spring, the screw, with no washer, and has never popped off on me. So I just tighten it down. Don't have to crank it down, just enough so it grabs the spring right there. So, and then you do the same for the other side. Okay, so what I wanted to show is now on the frame set, this setup, and this is following the manual itself. What this is designed for is if you wanted to use, if you want to put your battery a little bit more forward. And what that means, and I've done that before, I've done a couple of setups with my 700X where I had the flybarless controller mounted on the rear tray, and when I did that, I actually had the receiver pack also mounted here in the back tray, and that required the battery to be forward out a little bit more of the frames. I've since redone my setup where now I mount the controller, the flybarless controller, up front, and also started mounting the battery, the receiver battery, right out here. So with that, I now needed the battery tray to be a little bit more in. Now on the manual it does discuss that you can adjust these, but with this setup, and I'll show you, when it grabs in, the battery still sticks out, I would say, a little bit out here, right? That's based on how it straps in, okay? So what I've found, and I've seen it with the other team pilots, is, let me just take out this tray, is this is the tray that we built. They've swapped these two. So they've taken this mechanism and put it here and this over here. So what you get is like here. So here's the comparison. And you will see that this puts the batteries even more further in. Alright? So like my current 700, I use a Castle 160 on that because that's what I had in hand before the combos. And the weight on the front of the Castle 160 plus the receiver pack being here require the battery to be pushed in significantly more. So with that setup of a flipped latch mechanism, you can see the tray ends like right in here. So the batteries, when this is fully loaded, the batteries only just stick out all the way just right about here, which pretty much hides everything inside the frame. Okay, so just another option to know, depending on where you want to mount your electronics, that there is an option to mount the batteries really all the way inside the frame or a little bit outside on the frame, just by mere flipping these mounting points right here. And also you can also just do fine tuning by using the holes on the main frame. Okay, so with that, I will be wrapping up the mainframe portion of the build video series, and we will return with the tail section.